Hello everyone, welcome to Career Theory. We are back with another episode. I am your host Kumarsamy Chintala. I have my co-host Bharat Ramesh. Today we are bringing in another unique guest, Brenden Kumarsamy, founder and president of MasterTalk. He'll be joining us shortly and we are going to spend a lot of quality time talking about how you can elevate your career from his extraordinary journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I really thank you for this opportunity, especially we are doing this again from DC together. And we, yes, have been having a lot of fun during this whole experience of podcasting, amazing people. And guess what? We have Brenden Kumarsamy, the communication expert and the founder and president of MasterTalk. So let's get into the show right away, Sai.
Thank you. To introduce Brenden, he is the founder and president of MasterTalk, a former IBM business transformation consultant, a YouTuber, and a great keynote speaker. He coached many of the CEOs and C-suite executives and TED speakers. His uniqueness does not stop with coaching the industry experts and the C-suite executives. He also coaches many of the kids through his Kids Communication Accelerator program, which is one of the unique programs. And this list does not stop here. When you Google up about the Brenden, you'll see a lot more. But from this podcast, let's learn directly from Brenden about his personal journey. Hello, Brenden.
Hey, Brenden. We are excited to have you.
Excited to be here, you two. Hope you're doing well, and it's great to be here.
Wonderful. So to begin with, for the audience who does not know, I know you are a celebrity in many areas, but for the audience who does not know more about you, could you navigate us through your journey of your life so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. So I was born and raised in a city called Montreal in Canada. And for those who don't know, Montreal is a city where you need to know how to speak both English and French. So when I was 5 years old, my parents looked at me one day. They said, well, Brenden, you need to know how to speak French. So my whole life, not only did I struggle with communication, guys, I also had to present in a language I didn't know, growing up in a French education system. So that's where my journey started. And I struggled and made a bunch of pitfalls, made a lot of mistakes along the way. And then later on in my life, when I got into university, I went to business school and I did these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were playing basketball or cricket or rugby or some other dangerous thing that you can never see me playing, I was doing the presentation version of that. And that's how I learned how to speak. And then a few years later, after doing that, I realized that everything that I was coaching, a lot of the students were in these programs, didn't exist for free on the internet. And that's what led to the idea behind MasterTalk, the YouTube channel. So I started making videos in my basement on how to communicate ideas because I felt there was a big gap that was missing in the market. And then a few years after that, it turned to what it is today.
Wow, that seems like an amazing journey. Especially, I just want to touch base on the difference between the native speaker, like you were talking about English as well as, French. What was the difference like and how difficult was it for you to navigate from that particular journey to a journey where you are the one who's going to speak, who's speaking really well, excellent, and also making sure that everyone is learning the way to communicate well. So what was that shift like?
Yeah, absolutely, bro. That's a great question. I'd say for me, it was really challenging to your point, but allowed me to empathize later on because a lot of us speak English as a second language. So when I was doing a lot of these French presentations, I was really scared because I didn't know the language and I was scared of making a fool of myself. So the transition was really tough for me. And the way that I overcame it was I realized it was actually easier for me to write my speeches in my first language. So what I would do back even when I was 7 years old or 8 years old, which is what I teach clients now to do, is I wrote out my speeches in English because I knew how to speak English.
Yes.
And then I would translate them in French with a Google Translate or something. And then I would speak out the language in French. And then when I got older, the reason I got a lot more comfortable, it was mostly luck because after high school was over, I actually went back to English school. So I did French my whole life, but when I went to university, I had the choice to go back to English, and that's where my confidence boost came from.
Wow. No, I just wanted to learn that for sure. Really good one. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. With that, I want to touch base a little bit about how the Brenden is made. It's not about the success that we see right now, but I wanted to touch base for the audience that how the Brenden is made. And during the course of making the Brenden, the kind of setbacks that he has to face to become who he is. I wanted to understand about why did you choose the communication? Do you know in your high school, or do you know in your 10th class, or probably in the middle school, you're going to be a communication expert?
Yeah, definitely not, guys. For me, I wanted to be an accountant when I was 12 years old. We have these yearbooks, and I'm sure some of your kids or nieces and nephews know this. So when I was 12, everyone was said like astronaut. I want to be like a stand-up comedian. I want to be like an actor. And I wanted to be an accountant, actually, when I was 12. And the reason was because I was really good at mathematics in my report card, and I was terrible at everything else. I had 50s in French, I had 40s and everything else, but mathematics I was really good at. So I actually wanted to be an accountant until I got to university. The only reason I actually changed, so communication was entirely an accident, was I started doing these competitions, these case competitions, because I wanted a job. It wasn't like because I wanted to change the world or I wanted to change this impact or this legacy. Not at all. Like I come from a really poor family. Like my parents were minimum wage workers. They both worked in factories. So for me, I was the first ever person to graduate from university in my lineage. So that's why my parents, when they immigrated, I was like the golden kid. I was the person who was supposed to make it work for all of us.
Got it.
So for me, the focus was never to be like this communication expert. I was like, communication experts don't get paid money. What is this? You're like speaking, and forget that. Let's go be an accountant and make $100,000 a year. So I did these competitions because a lot of those executives at the big accounting firms, right? KPMG, PwC, EY, Deloitte, all those guys and girls, they come and they recruit the students. So that's how I got really good at communication. But then what happened was I accidentally learned how to speak because I was doing these competitions. I'm like the Michael Jordan that nobody really cares about. That's like the way I describe myself. Because Michael Jordan was like so focused in basketball and he loved basketball, but people care about basketball. So I had the same level of focus with presentations, but nobody cares about presentations except for me. So that's how I learned. And then I realized 3 years later that I was one of the youngest communication coaches in the world, because I'd coached like 80 people by the time I was 21.
So to summarize, what you're saying is we don't need to have these signs coming from the sky and tell us that you are going to become this superstar when you grow up. That's not going to happen. But during the course of life, when you're navigating it from a school to a college, sometime during the life, you found your passion, not necessarily for the sake of passion, probably for the sake of job, but you found communication as a way, as a ticket for the freedom, but eventually you fall in love with it, then you got struck with it probably.
It's a great point that you're bringing up, Simon. You summarized it so well. Let me actually paraphrase what you said in a different way. So I'm actually a very big believer that decisions are much more important than passions. I think passions are actually a really bad pursuit. I know that's really controversial. A lot of people say, follow your passion, I don't have much passion to follow. I was the only breadwinner in my family. Like I wasn't going to, go be a movie star or something. It's like, no, like the question I asked myself, even as a very young age, because I had a lot of pressure, right, to do well. I never asked myself, what am I passionate about? I didn't care about that. The question I asked myself, because you can be passionate about a lot of things. You can be passionate about your dog. You can be passionate about your cat. You can be passionate about doing your hair. You can't make money off of that. Versus decisions. So instead of saying, what are you passionate about? I asked myself, what does the world need me most to do right now and why? So I'll repeat that again. What does the world need me to do right now and why? So back when I was 12, the answer wasn't start YouTube, MasterTalk, change the world. No, the answer was get a job that's guaranteed income, make some money so you can figure out the next step. So then I made the decision to go to business school. Okay, but let's pay attention to the language. So I make the decision, no passion, because I knew I would be a good accountant, which I ended up being. So then I worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I got the job there. And then I made a new decision with the new information. I said, oh, a lot of the people in these case competitions, they're going into consulting jobs. They're working at IBM, they're making way more money, and it's way more fun. So I apply for jobs in consulting. I do interviews at McKinsey, I do interviews at all these firms. And then I get the job at IBM. My salary like triples, and I'm like, oh my God. And then I made the decision to do that. And I said, wait a second. Oh, I'm really good at communication. And I'm really good at this. So what's the punchline? If I never made the decision to be an accountant, I would not be sitting here in front of you guys today.
Absolutely.
Whereas the problem with most people is they don't make a decision. They just go, oh, I'm really passionate. I'm just gonna wait here, and then something's gonna come out of the sky.
But
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
if I have to ask you on that, who taught you to make these right decisions at the right time? Does it come from the experiences that you have to go through, or is it someone like schooling you throughout your journey to make this decision versus that?
Yeah, I wish I had a coach. I wish my parents could have bought me, a coach or somebody like me. That's why I'm so passionate about the kids thing that we're doing. But back then, Seth Godin says this really importantly. So let's paraphrase that. He says there's a difference between mentors and heroes. So a mentor is someone, to your point, right? Somebody's giving you advice. Somebody who's saying, hey, don't go left, actually don't do this, do something else. And a hero is someone that you admire, but that you never meet. So when I was younger, because I didn't have a lot of money, I relied a lot more on heroes rather than mentors. So I would study a lot of great individuals, but I never knew anybody that was really great. So I became my own mentor when I was 15, 16, 17. So to directly answer your question, Sai, I wasn't really being advised to do any of this. I pretty much had to figure it out on my own. But I got lucky that I lived in an era, like the time when I was 15, there was a lot of information out there. Like when I was 20, one of the main reasons I became the person I am today was because of podcasting. When I was 20 years old, I started listening to Lewis Howes' School of Greatness, which is one of the earlier podcasts that started. And I started listening to that show when he was like a year into the podcast. But if it wasn't for that information, if it wasn't for like heroes, I wouldn't have built up this expertise over time. So yeah, it definitely wasn't somebody pushing me. I had to push myself.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I definitely want to get back at this question particularly, but I wanted to step back where you said that you were studying and not getting the best grades, but still made it to the business school, and you went to PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then you went to IBM. So the question basically, is it really important to focus on grades versus the practical knowledge, which in your case was more towards understanding the communication, even with respect to French, with respect to English? But can you just throw some light on it so that our audience can also get some understanding that what is more important when they start their career, their education, their journey in general?
Absolutely, Bharat. So here's the way I think about this, guys. The analogy, because there's always something, so I'm never going to say college is a waste of time or college is great. I'm never going to say, because that's stuff, because for some people it makes sense, for other people it doesn't. So here's an analogy to help us understand this. In life, all of us are given a set of cards. So Sai is given a set of cards, Bharat is given a set of cards, and I'm given a set of cards. Let's say we're all playing poker together. So we can't change the hand. So what was my hand? Okay, Canadian citizen. I was born in Canada, but I had an alcoholic father. Because that was a challenge. But then I had a really amazing mom. I had a really amazing sister. I was really good at mathematics, but I was really stupid at languages. So everyone's dealt this hand. But here's the mistake people make, is they waste too much time trying to look at everyone else's hands. What's a good side? Oh, I like good side. So everyone's paying attention to the cards that everyone else has on the table, instead of focusing on the cards that they have in their hand. So this is why when the game starts, when the game is played, everyone loses.
Yep.
Except the people who are focused on their hand. So how does that analogy apply to your question? The advice that matters, that is consistent for all of us, is to study your hand. And what to specifically by studying your hand? Understand your strengths, but more importantly, understand your weaknesses. So now how does that apply to careers? What this applies to careers is the following. The most important thing you could do with your career, especially if you're young, is it's a lot easier for you to figure out what you don't want to be versus what you want to be. So it's a lot easier for you to say, I don't want to be a garbage man. I don't want to be a plumber, versus going, what should I do? Should I be a dentist or should I be a doctor? I don't think that's the right approach. The right framework is to ask ourselves, based on our skill set, based on our strengths, what should we not do in life and eliminate that off the table? I'm not going to be a circus performer. Okay, it's not me. I'm not going to do that. So somebody else, it's not me. And then with a smaller list, we can make better decisions. So I'll use mine as an example. So you guys, but I don't want you to pay attention to what I'm saying. I want you to pay attention how much I know myself. That's really the important piece. So even if I wasn't that great in elementary school, I'm actually a really smart kid. So when I got to high school, I got really good grades because I didn't study before. That was the reason. So I had really good marks. Like my average going out of high school was like 93%. I was on the dean's list, honors list. Like I was an A student. Like I wasn't like a DNF student who became an entrepreneur. Like I was definitely one of the smartest people in the school. And the reason I say that is not to make myself this amazing person. I was terrible at a bunch of other things.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Like I didn't think I'd ever be an entrepreneur. I didn't think that was in my DNA. But because I understood my strengths, I knew college was for me. If I never went to university, I would not be the person I am today. So for me, university made perfect sense. But if you take someone like a Gary Vaynerchuk,
yes,
for him, but the difference is me and him are the same. Because I understood that university was for me and that grades were going to get me my job in accounting and consulting. So I'm going to focus on that. Whereas Gary Vee understood that, oh shit, like I'm a D, like this is not going to work. College is not for me, but we need to make our own decisions.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
And one thing, which is the second thing, which, I just said, which I'll get back to, was you have a lot of wisdom, or you were able to make decisions when they were basically, you had those opportunities to make the right decisions. And you said you actually went through a lot of reading the experiences from someone else who was already an expert, or listening to the podcast. So is that also an important aspect which can help you elevate yourself from not having a direct mentor, but also indirect mentors? So just, a little more there.
Absolutely. Happy to. So here's the way I see this. Whether it's podcasts, whether it's books, pick a medium that you like. Clearly, people are listening to the show, they prefer podcasts, and go with that. So I'm not much of a reader. I always like to say that because it confuses people. Like I don't read a lot of books. I probably read a book a year. Like I'm not good. But podcasting, I'm vicious. Like I listen to 10 hours a week. Whenever I'm on flights, I'm listening to 5 hours a day. So that's my medium. But here's the thing that we know is true, guys. We know a few things. One, the card that we're dealt, the cards that the poker table gave us, we can't change. That's the cards. We have to work with the card. I'm not going to be an NBA player. I'm not going to be a cricketer. So the first piece is knowing that we can't change the hand. So we need to work with what we have and maximize it. Because that's the first thing. The second thing is other people have played this poker game before us. More importantly, 100 billion people plus have played this game before. So why waste time jumping around versus listening to other people's models of life?
Absolutely.
So the analogy I like to use is, for me, the way I explain my brain to people is like there's thousands of different tape recorders spinning in my brain. So one of them is, okay, Gary Vee did this at 8 years old. And then somebody else, Seth Godin, did this at 50, and then he went on to this at 25, Tony Robbins. So I'm every day, I take 2 new tape recorders and I put them in my brain. That's basically what I do. So if I have more data points, I know other people live their life, I can make better decisions. I have more data to make better decisions, but more importantly, I can avoid everyone else's mistakes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And there's a quote by Viktor Frankl here that I love that explains this so well. He says, live your life as if you messed up the first time and you had a second chance to play again.
Wow.
It's called near-death experience.
Right?
Wow.
Right? So the way I think about it is, like, I give you guys an examples, just one example. So say we take somebody like Lewis Howes. So Lewis is someone I studied quite a bit. So let me give you pros and cons. So pros is he taught me a lot about how to accumulate wealth, how to get health, how to be really healthy, how to make better decisions, to be grateful every day. So he taught me that. Then my business partner Vamsi taught me that later. But the one thing he never taught me that he's not good at is relationships. So he's still 38. He's not married. He doesn't have the kids, and that's something I want. So I take all of the things that I got from Lewis, but I also pay attention to the mistakes he made. So I go, let's not make those. But I do that with thousands of people. That's why I call it optimizing your life's potential.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something I just wanted to reiterate, even for the audience, that most of the times, if I've heard this most of the times where I cannot afford to have a mentor or someone to coach me, but they can actually get those resources at times through books, through the experiences that a lot of experts have gone through in their life. And also, like you said, the important thing, which is to avoid the same mistakes that they have mentioned and not fall in the pit again. So really powerful message. Thank you so much, Brenden.
And also I want to recognize the fact that just because Brenden is not talking about read books, but he's reading more than an average avid reader in the format of the podcast. Like someone might, the comprehension speed of a human to read versus listen, we can listen faster and process much more faster compared to be able to read and comprehend and then process. Everything has its own advantages. I'm not debating about one versus another, but Brenden doesn't read it, but he listens to it. That's how we should talk about it.
He's still consuming a lot of content in terms of whether it be health, wealth, relationships, or career, but he's still consuming and making right decisions based on that the content. Awesome.
I want to touch base on one personal side. While you are going through these 10 hours of podcast, crushing through podcast after podcast, coaching, flying, like sleeping in the airplanes most of the time, in the weekends flying, and all of that, does it impact your well-being? Does it impact you emotionally? Do you get crushed when you're doing this non-stop without a break?
Great question, man. Honestly, not at all. But there's a reason for this. Okay, there's a reason, because I want to make sure that's clear. Everyone is different. Okay, we all get energy from different ways. And most human beings, I don't think I'm most human beings. I mean, think of me, I'm a crazy guy. I'm like 25 years old, turning 26 soon, but like even I'm boggled. I'm like, geez, what's happened? So everyone's interested in different things. Some people like to spend time with their families. Other people like to go to the beach. Other people like to sit alone and read a book. And that's what brings them energy. Whereas me, what brings me energy is to play the game. Like, I just like the game. I like doing 10 interviews in a day. I like being on a flight to go to this event and meet this conference, because that's what brings me energy. I'm not the guy who's going to take a vacation on a beach. I can't do that for more than a day. Like, I'm sitting there, I'm just like, what am I doing with my life? This is stupid. And then I go, all of my vacations, all of my favorite vacations are at personal development conferences. I'm talking about ideas. If somebody comes up to me and asks me what the weather is, I'll hit them on the head. I was like, don't talk to me. I don't care about the weather. Like, so everyone is different, and there's no judgment here. I think the key is, for me, well-being is misunderstood. Being is not about following a specific set of practices that is enforced on every human being. That's not what well-being is. Oh, you need to meditate every day. Who said that? I don't meditate. You need to wake up in the rule. I don't do that. I wake up at 8 a.m. every day. I just work until midnight. So everyone's different. But what I would encourage people to think about, and this is an easy practical tip, is make a list of 3 to 5 things that bring you joy every day. And ask yourself, are you implementing those things? And what I like about this exercise is everyone's 3 to 5 things are different. So for me, those 3 to 5 things are yelling at my friends at dinner. That's only one of them. Going into very heated conversations. That's one. The second thing that brings me joy is eating junk food. Another thing that brings me joy is dancing alone in my basement or at clubs. Another one is like karaokeing, right? So everyone's different. Whereas somebody else who's more introverted, their list is like talk to nobody all day. It's exercise on my own. It's eat a sundae, eat an ice cream. But the key is to find that for yourself and do more of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because you are sounding more like a 25-year-old who is so focused Usually people at your age probably like chasing something different than what we are talking about. Absolutely. Now, while you are doing these variety of tasks, how do you keep your focus? Do you get distracted, or do you never get distracted?
No, I don't think I never get distracted. I'm definitely on my phone a bit too much than I should be. But I never get distracted from the big goal, though. I'm always focused on the big goal. Like MasterTalk's been consistent for many years now. I've been pretty focused on what I want to do. But now the question is, why is that? How do you do this? I've thought a lot about this. How do you translate focus into other human beings? There's a couple of strategies I'll give you, and my hope is one of them lands for people. So the first thing that's worked for me is by asking yourself really hard questions about life. I call them 80-20 questions. So I'm sure we're all familiar about the 80-20 principle, right? What is the 20% of the actions that get 80% of the results? So when I thought about that, obviously I didn't invent that. I looked at the 80-20 principle and I said, if I could only ask 3 questions, what are the questions that you can ask a human being? What are 20% of the questions that you ask a human being that gets 80% of the transformation? So that's a question I asked myself recently. So I call them 80-20 questions. So here are the 3 questions. The first question is, if you could only accomplish 3 things before you die, what would you want those 3 things to be and why? So what this does is it forces the person who's listening to the question to go, I want to do this. Oh, no, you can only do 3 things before you die. What do you want those 3 things to be? And then you're like, oh. So it forces you to narrow everything down to 3. That's the first question. The second question is, if you had all the money in the world, how would you spend your time? So if I gave you each $1 billion right now, now you don't have to work anymore. You don't have to work where you work. You don't have to do what you're doing. Would you still do the same thing? What time would you wake up? What would you do? A lot of people don't think about that question. And most people answer with travel. That's the most common answer to the question. And I always respond with, okay, so what are you going to do? Travel for 10 years and then die? And they go, oh. And then the third exercise I recommend is a question I got from Lewis Howes called the 3 truths. So let's say it's the last day of your life and it's time for you to go, and everything about your life gets erased. All the books that you wrote, all the podcasts you were on, and you could only leave behind 3 lessons. And those are the only 3 lessons that you can keep from you. What do you want those 3 things to be? So these questions, 80-20 questions, really help you focus on the bigger picture of your life, even if it always changes all the time, but it keeps you focused on what the end game is. And then when you stay focused on that, you have an accountability group, people around you that help you focus there and then help you do the daily actions required to get there.
I definitely wanted to stop a little bit there for our audience and wanted to reflect on those 3 things, because it's definitely $1 million value. And if anyone is running right now, walking right now, or in driving, I want you to go home again, re-listen to this whole episode and just stop there for a few minutes and make those 3 important things on your notes and reflect on that. I think that's the value that will take you wherever you want to go in your life. And really powerful message there, Brenden. I just wanted to add that for our audience there. Yeah.
I just want to touch base on those questions.
Yeah.
Because these are such a powerful questions. Do you go and sit next to the cemetery and then ask these questions? Because living in a comfortable house, in a comfortable couch, asking these questions, the answers never comes through. What do you do to get the realistic answers? Do you go and sit next to the cemetery and ask these questions?
That's funny, man. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. So for me, I guess it just comes a bit more naturally to me because I realized something. Because remember, there's thousands of tapes in my mind because I've learned from so many people with much more experience than me, who are much smarter than I am, much more wise, and I just have their wisdom today. And what I realized, the biggest insight is I realized who the real enemy was. And the real enemy is not your friends. It's not the guy who's yelling at you in the traffic. It's not the bus. Close. The real enemy is time.
Oh.
That's the enemy that you're trying to beat because you don't know how much time there is left. That's so why I got so wise so quickly, and I still have a lot more to go, is I just realized, yeah, sure, I'm 25. People tell me I'm young. I'm not young. I'm going to be, yeah, sure, it's cool. I'm 25. In 5 years, I'll be 30. And when I'm 30, I'm just normal. Oh, I'm just not young anymore. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah, I could use that card, right? I could use that card for maybe 4.5 more years. Okay, he's 26. He's a young guy. when I'm 30, I'm not young anymore. It's interesting because when you go from 29 to 30, you go from, oh, this guy's really young to, oh, he's just 30. So it's funny. But the point I want to drive is I realized that a lot of the rules in society are made up. So the only thing left to do is to make up your own rules. So when I realized that time was the enemy, my time was running out, whether I had 50 more years, 40 more years, that urgency that I felt from people who are wiser than me made me realize that I need to optimize for what I would do if I had $1 billion right now. So the other piece is the questions, because I wanted to get to that end game faster, forced me. And this goes back to my first step to greatness team. The first step to greatness is not knowing what your passion is. It's making a decision to find what that is, even if it takes you forever to find it. Do anything to find it. Like for me, when I was 20, my mission wasn't to be MasterTalk or whatever I'm doing now. It was to go, okay, if I'm going to make $500,000 at IBM, I should probably donate 10% of that to Scott Harrison's charity water organization and do that. And that's going to be my legacy. I'll be really rich, but I'll give back to charity. That was my initial plan. But I kept trying to find the gift, even if I never knew it. And then all of a sudden I woke up one day and it just fell on my lap. And I was like, oh, but it wasn't an accident. I kept looking for the gift.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just want to reiterate for anyone listening to this podcast, the word young, you are so young is a trap word that people use so that people may not take necessary actions. It does not matter whether you are like 20s, 15s, or even if you are like 40s, you are not so young. You never know how much time is left for you.
I actually have a kind of counter question to, or counter thought to it, because Gary V, recently I was listening to one of his podcasts. He was telling a lot of youngsters who were coming to the show and asking the brilliant questions, but how do we get there? How do we get there? How do we hustle? And his answer was, you need to slow down. You need to be able to understand that there are things that are going to happen in the near future. So what do you think, according to Gary? Like, it's a little different take on everything that we were talking about. So what do you want to add there? Yeah.
I'm so glad you asked me that question. I've been on so many podcasts. Nobody asked me that. So I'm so glad you do. So here's my comment on this. And this is all the respect in the world for Gary.
Yes. Yes.
Never, ever listen to just what somebody says. Always watch what they do. So the reason you guys respect me is not just because of what comes out of my mouth. It's because of my output. So I don't just tell Sai or Bara or you guys to say, hey, you should go focus on the storytelling thing or this. No, like I'm doing it. So there's an alignment between what somebody's saying versus what somebody is doing. That's not what Gary Vee did in his 20s. Yeah. Gary Vee worked like a dog, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week at a wine shop. Patience, really? So we have to contextualize all of this. So the point that Gary Vee's driving, because he's not good at context, but that's why he's a big social media, because of the simplicity of his language. I like to be more in depth because that's just more my style. But because of the simplicity, he's reaching more people, which is great. I think that's excellent. But what he actually did was he was very aggressive about his output, but he was patient about the result that aggressive output gave him. So for me, even if I really wanted to do something important with my life, I didn't just sit there and go, oh, I'm going to be patient. No, I said, look, if I can't figure out what the passion is, let me just do something else. Let me get into IBM. Let me get a job at PwC. Let me make some money. So I'm also doing something. But because I was always doing something, eventually that doing led to MasterTalk. But if Gary Vee's telling me to be patient and I'm dumb, I'll just go, okay, I guess I'll be patient. I guess I'll go play video games. That's how people are internalizing that message.
I think that is purely context sensitive, because people don't mix up the messages. Like slow down does not mean slow down in every single minute. Slow down in a certain context so that you will slow down to fast and not to like go fast all the time.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, the reason why I asked that is to point that kind of intention where someone is telling you to do things in a certain way, but also not reflecting it in their own career, is a way where you're like confused whether, oh wait, do I really do that or not? So really helpful that you put the context there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And here's a good tip that I have on this as well. The smartest people in the world, this is what they're doing. People are listening to this podcast. is they're not going to implement everything I say,
Mm.
which is the right thing to do. Which is the right thing to do. Let me explain why. Everyone has their own unique experiences. So the goal whenever you're listening to somebody talk is not to say, how can I implement all this? Or the opposite, which is worse. Oh, everything this person's saying is garbage, or Grant Cardone. Like so many people just
Yes,
discount him. They go, oh, this guy knows nothing. And I know a guy who's worth $100 million, and I ask him his advice, and he goes, oh, just read 10x 10 times and you'll be successful. So it's not about whether somebody's good or something's bad, but rather saying, what is this person saying that I can take 2 or 3 nuggets that applies to my unique experiences? So I'll give you an example. One of the piece of advice I have for people is you should just live with your family and combine all of your incomes. The reason I'm super successful financially is because me, my sister, and my mother still live together and we all have incomes. So this is why our household income is like really high for the country. Whereas not everyone can apply that information because some people might have a good relationship with their mother. Oh, Brenden, I can't do this. It doesn't work for me. And that's okay. But there's 2 to 3 things that I'll say on this episode that make sense for you. And those 2 to 3 things will be different. But the people who win, not just figure out what those 2 to 3 things are, they implement them right away. And that's how you should do this.
Absolutely. I don't know if audience can really understand the nugget that you just throw.
Yeah.
This is like ingrained into our systems for so long that we understand the group setting a lot more than an individuality.
And with respect to just sidelining with the topic, with respect to communication accelerator or MasterTalk, I want to understand the deep intention behind why it was started in the first place. Yeah.
Absolutely, Brenda. So what happened was, going back to the case competitions. So at this point, I was 22 years old. I had landed the dream job I had wanted for a very long time in consulting. It was like November of 2018 or something. I'd finally gotten the call after 8 months of preparing for interviews. I got rejected from every consulting firm. IBM was my last shot. I had 1 bullet left in the tank, and I hit the bullseye. I got the job, and I was like, thank God. So I resigned from PwC. I was getting ready to start my hot job, and I realized something, is that my game was coming to an end. So what do I mean by this? When I was doing case competitions, I had a lot of fulfillment. I was the dictator of that program. That's the better version. I was like on top of the world. We were winning international competitions left and right. I was training all of the best speakers in that program for free, obviously, back then. And I realized that I was going into retirement. And I know that's weird to understand, but for those who don't really get this, think of it like you're a sport athlete. One day there's 16,000 people in an arena screaming your name, and the next day nobody cares who you are.
Oh my God.
Right? So that was happening for me with case competitions. Is initially I had done them to get a job, which was the goal. But after I got the job, I realized that case competition was my life. That's all I did. So people understand this. I don't think you two even know this. I was so obsessed with case competitions that even during the Christmas holiday, students were not allowed to see their families.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
They had to practice. And the reason they had to practice was because the competition was January. So I remember it was New Year's Eve. We were all sitting, it was 2 a.m. in the morning. My friend Kevin looks up to me, he goes, Happy New Year. And I look at him, I was like, shut up and get back to work. We have a competition in 3 days. So I was upset, and obviously we won all of those competitions, but I realized that the game was ending. And then I thought, I really did, guys. I really thought my corporate job was going to fill that gap. I really thought, and it didn't.
It was why.
It was why. The first couple of weeks, don't get me wrong, I loved corporate. Most people, they always say they hate corporate. I wasn't like that. My team was amazing. IBM was a great company. And I lived the life. I was in really expensive hotels. I had really nice food. People were calling me sir. It was really confusing. My whole life changed. But I realized that when I got the money, I got the job, I got the prestige, I realized that's not what I wanted in life. Because, and to be quite frank, I realized that getting to partner, getting to executive was going to be really easy. because I was talking to a lot of the other students who got jobs, and I thought everyone was like me, like podcast and case com. And I looked at people and I was like, "Hey, why did you get a job at IBM?" They're like, "I just applied and I got it." I was like, "Oh my god, this is my competition." So, anyways, long story short, guys, I realized something was missing, and I realized I was going to lose this game because I was going to make a lot of money in 10 years, but there was no fulfillment. I started getting worried. And that's when I started doing more personal developments, thinking about the future. But at the same time that was happening, one of my old students in university sat down with me, a guy named Aziz. He's 40 years old. He works as an accountant. And he had to redo his university degree because he was from Kazakhstan. And we're sitting together and he asked me a question that nobody asked me before. And the question was, how did you learn how to speak? Brenden, you've been coaching all of these people, 70, 80, 90 people. How did you learn how to speak? And I didn't have an answer. I was like, I don't know. I didn't do Toastmasters. I didn't have money for it. I didn't have a coach. I just learned. And but didn't you do YouTube videos or anything like that? Did you watch any video? I was like, no. And he's, oh, but can you send me? Maybe you can see. And I was like, what is this guy talking about? So I had 4 months before I started working at IBM. This was December 2018. So I'm watching a lot of these YouTube videos and I spent maybe a few hours and I was horrified by what I saw. Horrified. All of the advice made absolutely no sense. So at this point, I was a practitioner. I knew what I was doing because I'd coach people, but I never wanted to be a coach like full time. I didn't even know you could make money until I met my business partner. Yes. So I was like I was watching these videos and I was so disgusted of how bad the content was. Like the information was super general, be yourself, get up on stage. I was like, this is nonsense. Yep. So the reason I started making YouTube videos was not just to help the world, but was also to find a sense of fulfillment with myself because I needed a new game to play. Because I realized case competition was coming to an end. So that's why I started MasterTalk. But then after it grew into helping every human being on earth become great speakers.
Absolutely.
I love the intention for sure. Yeah.
We can relate to that because every time we go and talk to a guest on the podcast, it feels like, wow, we learned so much, which we may not be able to learn from a book or from watching something, but this is like a person-to-person conversation, which really invokes everything.
And definitely, I think with respect to what your intention was, it was really lovely to listen to the actual intention of making sure that what you have, you're sharing with the others around the world so that we win together. That's the whole intention. And I think that's the same intention we started this podcast. We know Brenden, we know Lauren, we know so many good people who have a lot to offer. And yet there are people in our proximity not able to reach that kind of information. Right. And for our audience, if you haven't checked out MasterTalk, that's the go-to place for your communication skill that you want to improve on. So definitely I wanted to add there. Yeah.
Now I wanted to touch base on your business side of it. So far we talked about how the Brenden is made. Is he made from the clay or is he made from the gold? So now we talked about it. Now we understand your process of thinking. Now let's touch base onto the business, because business itself is a different animal compared to a personality or a human trait. How were you able to make that shift from being an employee to an entrepreneur or a business? Just like your YouTube videos were helped by someone asking, hey, have you ever watched these videos? Did that happen like that? Or was it like some kind of an accident that happened?
Yeah, it was mostly an accident. I got a bit lucky with the partners I met along the way. But I would say, let me start with some advice before I go into my story. So the advice is super simple. I do not recommend entrepreneurship to 99% of human beings. And the reason is very simple. Human beings cannot do one thing, and that one thing is necessary to entrepreneurship, or you'll die in entrepreneurship. And that one thing is being willing to change. Being willing to change. If you're an entrepreneur, you have to deal with the truth, the reality of the situation, the facts. And if you cannot adapt, you die. That's how business works. And most human beings cannot change themselves out of a box. So I don't recommend entrepreneurship to most people. Here's the advice I always give, because I was like being honest on podcasts.
Yeah.
I call this side hustle comfortably. I hate this idea of, oh, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you need to eat beans out of your garbage can. And that's not at all the point. I had a 6-figure job before I quit to be an entrepreneur. And I did 3 things before I even quit IBM. 3 things. Number 1, I already had sales. So I had already replaced half of my income, and I'll get into how I did that. Number 1, I'd replaced half of my income. So I had a product that was selling. People wanted the product, it was working. I saw people get results, and I was like, this is working, and people are paying me to do this. And the value that they're getting exceeds the money that they're giving me. So whether that money is $1 or $10,000, they're getting more value than the money. And they're telling me that's why they keep buying it. So that's the first thing. So I had sales. The second thing is I had a year, not a month, a year in savings. So it was impossible for me to lose. So literally, like, I had saved up every penny from IBM. Because remember, I still live with my mother. Like, I saved up every penny I had to make sure there was 0 risk. Because some people, they might be able to quit and not take any risk. I had a lot of risk to quit because I'm like you guys, I provide for my mother, I provide for my sister. Like, I pay the mortgage, I pay all the bills. Until recently, my sister has a job now, so now we're good.
Awesome.
Back then, it was just me, and I was like 22 or 23. So that's the second piece. So I'll repeat that again. I had half sales replace my income. Second piece, I had a year in savings. So even if I didn't make a money for a year, I could still last a year on my savings. That's how much money I saved up. That's how much little risk I took. And number 3, I had a clear game plan on how to replace all of my income. I knew exactly what I was going to do on day 1. I knew exactly what I was going to do on day 7 or 14. Boom, go on Clubhouse, get this client, do this, do that. I knew exactly what I was going to do. And that's the 3 pieces. So what's my advice? My advice is get a high-paying job. That's my number 1 piece of advice. Get a high-paying job. For me, it was to be an accountant. For you, it's going to be something. Maybe it's to be a plumber. Maybe it's to be an Uber driver. Figure out what that thing is. Start making money. And then after you start making money, what happens? Because statistically, for most people, this is just the right piece of advice to 95% of people. And then after you start making more money, what happens is you have more time to think. Because now you're not worried about, I was like dead broke until 4 years ago. That's how recent it was for me. Like 0 to 21, like even when I had the job at IBM, I was starting 5 months after I started, I had to take out loans because I had $500 in my bank account. Like, I had no money. And then after we solved the money problem, provided you're not done with your money, obviously spend less, don't buy a BMW, be smart, obviously, don't do dumb things, have a 6-month emergency. What happens is now your mind starts opening up to new opportunities. And that's what happened with me. After I got the job at IBM, the first thing I did, okay, this is something I want people to listen to. I don't actually haven't said that on a podcast. I started my job in April 2019, and my first investment in personal development was September of 2019. So I was quick. The second I started making money, I was like, okay, how do I put this back? Let's go. Put this back into me. I need to get smarter. So the second I started making money, I immediately invested in personal development. That's how I met Vamsi, my business partner, 5 months into this whole thing. So that's the second piece. And then the third piece is when you think of ideas, side hustle at nights and weekends. Because if you can't play your idea on nights and weekends, you will never make it as an entrepreneur. So for me, when I was working at IBM as a management consultant, I was implementing SAP. So it's a lot of hours. I was doing 70, 80 hours a week. I was also working on MasterTalk 20, 30 hours a week too. So I was working 100 and 105 hours a week. I was nuts. And it was only then that I quit my job. So that's what I recommend for people. Just not the 70 hours. You could do a 40-hour job, but same concept. Yeah.
No,
Absolutely.
definitely. I think that's really a good message there. A lot of times people think being an entrepreneur is day one thing, which they end up using all the funds, all the things they are into, and then they fail miserably and they never be able to get through the whole journey. Instead of making sure that you actually have a job with whatever your skill is, and then use that and leverage to start something on the side, and then make it the primary eventually once you figure things out. Really a good one there.
Absolutely.
Correct. And then one other point, no, you're good, Sai, you're good, is the question that you asked earlier, how did I turn this into a business, right? Really quick. So what happened was I was making videos for fun every week. And I wasn't making any money. All my money came from IBM. IBM actually fronted the cost for MasterTalk. So I was taking my money at IBM and I was funding MasterTalk. Like I think 25% of my salary back then was
No.
going into my YouTube channel. It's less now because I make more money off the channel, but back then it wasn't like that. So what happened was I knew I could charge for communication coaching, but I didn't really know how that was going to work. So when I met my business partner Vamsi at Summit of Greatness, which is a live event in Columbus, Ohio, I actually signed my first ever paid client there. So I met a guy in real estate. We just talked. I told him about MasterTalk and my YouTube channel. He was like, "Oh wow, I'm so inspired. Do you do life coaching?" And I was like, "What's a life coach?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'll pay you to be my life coach." So I wasn't doing communication. And he was like, "How much do you charge?" And I just went, $100 an hour, which I thought was like so much money, $100. He was like, "Oh yeah, let's do it. Can I buy like 10 sessions?" And he gave me $1,000. And I was like, my whole life changed. I was like, this is crazy. People pay me for this shit.
Yeah.
So that's how the money started. And then obviously I got lucky with my business partner. He just knew a lot about the coaching industry and he helped me package it. But the other point that I think is important is I tried a lot of customers. So I tried students, but they were broke. They didn't have a lot of money. I tried early stage CEOs, like founders of companies. It didn't work either because at the beginning they were still broke. They couldn't afford a coach. So nothing was working until I met the executive. So what I realized is there was a big gap in the market later because a lot of people in our community, a lot of people in the Desi community, they can't get promoted at work without communication. But they didn't want to give any money to anybody because nobody looked like them who taught this too. So I saw a massive gap in the market. Once again, it wasn't me, it was my business partner who gave me this idea. And he said, why don't you just focus only on Desi people who already have executive jobs? So all those people have money. They're all making at least 100 grand a year. And most of the people in our community, I would say 80 to 90% of everyone who's wealthy in our community are almost all in technology. Almost all of them. Some of them are in like doctors, some of them are physicians, but most of them are in tech. And the last part as well was that most of the tech desis are more open to change because their job requires it. You got to learn the new language. You got to keep up with the new Web3. You got to do that or else you're obsolete. So those people were the most open to coaching. And then I found product market fit. I had the right product, I had the right market, and those people trusted me. So there's a lot of word of mouth because when I got them the results, they started referring me to other desis in the community. And me and my business partner, Vamsi, worked together to just serve that community. My business exploded. And that's how I left IBM.
Absolutely,
Nice.
absolutely. So basically, to summarize, if someone is choosing to become an entrepreneur, there are two sides of it. One side is take care of the financial portion, either by getting a high-paying job and save at least for an year. At the same time, practice working hard, like probably like work over the weekends, nights, probably like practice putting 60 hours, 80 hours, sometimes like 100 hours per week and see if you can survive or sustain that amount of work. Because the moment you become an entrepreneur, the life is not going to be like 9 to 5 and you can still have time to complain. Here, the moment you become an entrepreneur, there is no more time left to complain either. So that's the second portion that you should also focus so that you can become a successful entrepreneur. Thank you. Now, let's talk a little bit about the kids coaching. What made you to coach the kids? Because the kids have a lot of time, maybe when they go to the college like you, they might also find communication as their goal. What drive you towards coaching the kids?
So if I'm being perfectly honest, I didn't want to do kids coaching at the beginning. My business partner gave me the idea to do it because he said I was going to learn something. So I was very resistant at the beginning because I wasn't used to. The youngest person I coached before that was probably 16, 17. I hadn't gone under that age. And he just said, let's give it a try. Let's give it a shot. I'll give you a couple of kids. I'll give you my kids too. Just start coaching them on their communication skills. And when I started coaching them, I realized how beneficial and important it was for me to do this because I started learning things that the adults weren't teaching me. So a couple of things that they taught me. I actually learned a lot more from coaching kids than coaching adults. I'll give you guys three big things. The first thing I learned was, when does the fear of communication begin? Does it begin at the age of 5? Does it begin at the age of 10? Does it begin at the age of 15? So what I realized when I was coaching kids, guys, is a lot of the kids who were under 9 years old, they weren't that scared of communication. If I told them to do something, they just said, oh yeah, like I don't know what a presentation is. But then what I realized was the kids between the ages of 10 and 13, really nervous. Really, some of them are crying in my class, and I didn't know how to deal with that either. I was like, oh my God, I've never had somebody cry. And then obviously people are more mature, like me, 15, 16, that's really easy. So that was the big thing I learned, is where does the fear of communication start? That was the first lesson. The second lesson I learned from coaching kids is they taught me how to coach the adults better, because I had to come up with new analogies that I didn't know before. I'll give you an example. One of the girls in my class was like 6 years old, 5 or 6. And it was one of my clients' daughters. And she didn't know what a presentation was, which is normal because she's 5. So she was like, what's an introduction? What's a conclusion? And I looked at her and I was like, how do I explain this to her? So I had to come up with new analogies, like the jigsaw puzzle analogy, where you start with the edges pieces, you can work your way into the middle. So I learned that from coaching kids. And the third biggest insight I got is, the only way I'm going to change the world is by coaching kids. And the reason is because they're going to help me solve the problem at scale. So my big vision with MasterTalk, my big vision is, I want to start with coaching executives so I make money. And then through that money, I make my media channel more bigger. So my YouTube channel gets bigger, my TikTok gets bigger, and I become a personal brand. But then after that happens, and I have a best-selling book, I have a New York Times bestseller, all that stuff. The third part of my vision, which is going to be in my 30s, is attacking the education system directly. It's just, the reason I'm not starting with that is because it's lots of red tape. And coaching the kids right now is giving me a lot of simple ideas and lessons over the next 10 years that I'm going to be able to leverage when I have all of those relationships at scale. Oh, I can't hear you anymore, guys.
Can you hear us now?
Yeah, you're good.
Basically, what I was saying is, it's also, I think, where you're putting the seed at really early age into a child a kid who can eventually become a leader in their life. And that's the kind of generation we would need, where they are really a master in the way they communicate within all the areas of their life, relationships, job, career, business, whatever it is. I think that's the way I look at it. And personally, you are doing an exceptional job, even Vamsi, with you, because that's the market where it's sometimes underlooked, because communication is not just for the people who are already working or already in the college, but it's actually for someone who's going to be in the college, in the career, and in the business. So definitely, I think that's how we all need to look in a different perspective.
With that, let me ask you this one question about communication. Now, for the communication, there is an organization called Toastmaster, which is well known across the whole globe, which is geared for in-person speeches and speakers and all of that, versus the communication accelerator offered by Brenden Kumarsamy and his business partner. Now, how your program is different from going to a Toastmaster or like any other communication programs?
So absolutely. So let me touch on something Bharat said earlier, and then let's jump into that question. So what Bharat said, what I liked is, you're right. The kids are really under-tapped market. And the point I want to drive here is, my big vision for the world that we haven't talked about yet is, I think the next Elon Musk is a 15-year-old girl right now that no one has ever heard of.
Ooh.
So right now, right now as we're talking, there's a 15-year-old girl right now in Utah or like Cambodia or somewhere who is Elon Musk. She's the next Elon Musk, but nobody knows who she is. So I'm always thinking about that girl. That's why I started making videos, because I don't know who the girl is. I can't look at Elon Musk at 15 years old and go, oh, you're going to be the future. Let me coach you. I'm not that smart. There's no one's good. But the problem with every other coach in my industry is, they're not taking care of those people. I'll give you this crazy example that I've ever said on the show. It's super fascinating. I was watching this TikTok the other day, and Taylor Swift was giving this speech. because she won like Woman of the Year. She's like a singer, for those who don't know. So she's giving this speech and she's saying, this award is for the future Woman of the Year in 5-7 years. The girl who's 11 years old right now, playing piano. The girl who has big dreams to be a singer. All of us need to take care of that girl. And then 7 years later, the Billie Eilish wins Women of the Year award. And she says in that speech, I get goosebumps just thinking about it. And she says, I was 11 years old and I watched Taylor Swift deliver that presentation in 2013. And I thought myself, I was that little girl. And she just ended her speech with, thanks for taking care of me. And it just like completely changed. Like I just sat there and I was like, that's exactly what I'm doing. It's like when I'm 30 years old, somebody's going to come up to me. I don't know who it is, not 30, maybe 35. Somebody's going to come up to me one day and they're just going to look at me and they're going to be like this 20-year-old kid who has a $1 billion company. And they're just going to be like, aren't you the founder of MasterTalk? And I was like, yeah. And at that point, MasterTalk probably has millions of subscribers and I don't know who's impacting what. And the kid's just going to look at me and go, hey, I was really scared of communication. I was 11. And you're a really young guy when you started MasterTalk. And I started watching all of your videos. And yeah, now because of you, I'm scared of anything.
That actually
right? So,
goosebumps, really.
Yeah.
that's the game.
That's where your concept of mentors versus heroes, like at some point in time, the mentors may become the heroes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And
Look,
yeah, I think even with respect to Brenden, what you're doing right now, I'm already sure that a lot of people are already reaching out to you. But this happens to everyone, even in my personal career, my personal life, where we looked up to someone, the way they were carrying themselves, the way they were communicating, and suddenly we actually go there and tell them, you are the reason why we are here today. And that really gave me goosebumps because it's definitely going to happen in your case too, for sure. Yeah.
and I think that's the thing. Like everyone wants different things out of life, guys. But I think for me, it's all about the impact that I get to create in the world. That's the game. Like I'm already making the money I need. Sure, I'll make more in life and I'll do better fun just because of the nature of the business I'm in. But I think for me, it's like it's that game. Because if I could be that next Dale Carnegie, which I know I will be, and I democratize this information after I'm dead, I'm not just talking about that 15-year-old girl. I'm talking about every Elon Musk for the rest of humanity. Thousands of years after I'm gone, hundreds of thousands of years. I want to make sure that when I die, that even if every speech coach after me is a selfish asshole, that they can still learn from me. And I'm still holding their hand even when I'm gone. And that's really the game that pushes me to do better every day.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up to the closing section, I wanted to ask one question, one simple, straight question. What is meant by communication to you?
Yeah, I think for me, communication means a lot of things. I would say the first one is a definition. And for me, communication is defined as communicating an idea, sharing an idea that results in a specific outcome for a specific audience. So it's sharing an idea that leads to a specific outcome for a specific audience. So if you're a terrible speaker, but you want to get $10,000 and you get your 10,000, I don't have any feedback for you. You got the outcome you want, right? But I would say for me, the other piece of communication for me is communication is so much more than being on a stage. It's every single interaction we have with every human being, to the way that we order food at a restaurant with the waiter, to the way that we hold our 5-year-old niece to a park and we're talking to the other parent who has another annoying kid and we're talking about our day, to the way that we travel and we meet other people, to the way we take care of our families. Communication is not just about the bottom line, it's about the bottom line of our life. It's about leading a fulfilling life. So when we master communication, that's what it means to me. And the question that all of us need to ask ourselves is, how would our life change if we were exceptional communicators? Don't just write that question down. Really think about it, because we all have our own reasons. And once we find the reason that sticks with us, then we can become the master that we're looking to be.
For our audience, I just wanted to reiterate that communication is not about standing on a stage and giving presentations. It is not just the verbal voice that comes out of our mouth. It is more than that. That's where the Brenden is going to help with this communication accelerator. It is not just about speaking in public and getting better at the job, but more than that, the communication is going to help elevate your career, and communication is one of the key ingredients to be really successful at your career.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I think, yeah, with that, he already mentioned that we are going to go to the closing questions, which is something similar to the rapid fire, but we have some basic questions we're going to ask, and we'll definitely end the session soon. So with that, I will ask the first question. I wanted to see, as a communication expert, what are 3 tips that you would give right this moment that can help our audience?
Absolutely. So here's the 3. Random word exercise. So pick one random word, right? Like phone, like copper, like pen, and give 30-second presentations on each word. This sounds really silly, but when you're presenting these random words, you're actually communicating areas that you have no expertise in. And this is a great gift you can give to yourself. Because if you can learn to make sense out of nonsense, you can make sense out of anything. So if you can make sense out of nonsense, you can make sense out of anything. And that's what the random word exercise allows you to do, is once you do it 40, 50, 60 times, it develops your confidence. So when you go back into the boardroom, you go back into the business, and somebody's asking you a question about something, the presentation becomes a joke. So practice that. Don't write it down on a piece of paper, but practice it. And I always like to say, before I go with the other tips, there are 3 types of people listening to the show right now. Person number 1 is listening to this passively in a car. It's like, oh, that's cute. Random word exam. It's like a toy or something I give my kid. And then they just forget about it. Person number 2, smaller percentage, they're taking notes. Like, oh, I like this random word exercise. Oh, Taylor Swift, I should go listen to a song. But this is great. Right. So they're taking a bunch of notes, and then they take their notes and then they throw it into the fire. They never look at it again. And then there's a really small, this is like tiny. We're talking 1%, maybe 2, because you guys are really talented people. Maybe there's 2%, but it's probably 1. Who are taking notes and are implementing 2 or 3 things. Let me spend 5 minutes, not 5 years, 5 minutes tomorrow. Let me do the random word exercise. Let me try this. So ask yourself, are you person 1, person 2, or person 3? So really visualize yourself. So let's go back to the exercise.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was really good.
Of course. And let me give you the other tips too. But that's the most important one.
Yes,
it's like implement. Yes. Don't just write this down and think it's cute. Because the best way to speak is to speak, right? Yeah. So the second piece is question drills. So what you want to do is whenever you feel nervous in a boardroom or at work where somebody's asking you a question that you don't know the answer to, what I would encourage you to do is every morning you get up, let's say you have a presentation, think of one question you think somebody's going to ask you and write the answer. And do that every day. It'll take you 2 minutes. Do that every day, and you'll be much more resilient. And then the last piece of advice that I have on this is communicate and practice communication like a jigsaw puzzle. So going back to puzzles, right, what we used to do as kids, we always start with the edge pieces first whenever we're trying to build a puzzle. And the reason is because the puzzle pieces are easier to find in the box, and then we put them together and we work our way into the middle. But we don't do that with our communication. We shove a bunch of stuff in our presentations. We ramble throughout the whole thing, and then we go, oh, thanks, not the right approach. So instead, what you want to do is practice the edges first. Practice just your introduction 30, 40, 50 times. Then do the same thing with the conclusion. What's a great movie with a terrible ending? Last time I checked, terrible movie. And then tackle the middle pieces.
Definitely. I think I just wanted to quickly add there that a lot of times I've heard that you cannot afford anything that's $1 million worth content. Please listen to what Brenden just said. It's definitely going to take you places. I'm definitely sure about it. So thank you so much, Brenden.
Before we wrap up, we want to ask you one other question about what is it one thing that no one knows about you?
One thing no one knows about. I'm super open on podcasts. That's something nobody knows about me. I was going to say something stupid. Nobody knows what I'm presenting at the live events. That's one. What else? What else does nobody know about me? Is there quality?
You think everyone knows about you, but what is one thing that no one knows about you?
I don't say this a lot, but I guess the one thing is my mother's the most important human being in my life. Like
Mm,
the reason I live with her is not just a money thing. It's because I feel a lot of us, we take our parents for granted.
mm,
Like we think they're gonna live forever. And I think what I realized, because my dad passed away when I was 22, I think what I realized is time is really finite. Some people just move along to another state, they leave to another country, they leave to another continent. And then when their parents die, it's like a shock to them because they haven't seen them in 3 years. And I told myself, because of how hardworking I am, because I work like a dog, and you guys know this, like this, I knew if I left this house, I would never see my mother again. I knew it. That's why I never moved to the US. I thought about moving to New York because it was easier for my flights with everything I was doing. I thought about moving to Florida. And the only reason I chose not to was because of my mom. That was the main reason. It was just because of family. So I think people don't know that I really care a lot about family. I just don't talk a lot about it. So that's
Thank you.
probably it.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah, love it for sure. And before we end this, I just wanted to make sure that we ask you what is that one platform or multiple platforms which I am aware of, but not our audience is aware of, that they could reach out to you directly and learn from you directly. So what's that like? Yeah.
Absolutely, guys. Fantastic interview. Thanks for having me. So there's two ways to stay connected. The first one is the YouTube channel. You go to
Mhm.
Master Talk in one word. You'll have access to hundreds of free videos on how to communicate. And if you're interested in coaching, sign up for one of our free interactive live trainings over Zoom. It's a call where I'm coaching people for free on that call. And for you to register for that, it's rockstarcommunicator.com.
Gonna
Absolutely.
put that in our description for sure. And also he's on the Clubhouse and LinkedIn. You can definitely check out his content because that's where he writes a lot and lot, which is really important, that can change your life and also elevate your career. That's the whole intention here. Thank you so much, Brennan. Thank you for
Yeah.
this opportunity. We
Thank
are
you, Brenden.
extremely grateful for this.
Thank you
I'm
for
grateful, both of you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.